Good morning, everybody. I'm expecting this meeting to be small because we changed times on it, but it's kind of cool the time that we changed it to on June 30th now being the 8th-year anniversary of Yarnell. So this is going to be a little different meeting because normally we're doing this through Zoom with the author, but the book is here. So I have Brad Mayhew, the author of Origins. Hopefully you guys have all read it because that's the reason why we're doing the book club. Wanted to sit down with Brad today and discuss his book, which is going to turn into multiple books, and kind of go from there, and where myself and Brad met and kind of started just talking about human factors and things like that with my sawtooth entrapment. So Brad, welcome. Say hello to the group.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hey, everybody.
So Brad, when we first got together, I think you came to Southern California. How long after the investigation did you come and present out here in Southern California?
When we first met, I want to say it was in the maybe 2007, 2008, and I had just I was a hotshot, and I had just started this human factors journey that I was on, and it was probably my first or second season that I didn't go back to the hotshot crew because I'd been invited to these trainings, and so I had hit the road, and so it was very, very early. And I think I had been asked to do a presentation for the county training officers and shared some LCES material, and that's where we just kind of hit it off. So
was that the 2 and 7 tool that you came out for, or it might have been the
the 2 and 7 tool was kind of the first one of the first projects that I started working on. Basically the idea there was that when we look at burnover tragedies, we tend to think about all these complicated factors, and what I was trying to do with the 2 and 7 tool was to say, well, there's really maybe two key. At the time I used the word error more freely than I do now. I try to be more judicious with the use of that word, but at the time I would say, well, there's two fundamental errors behind all our entrapments. That's how I saw it at the time. And then there's basically these 7 maybe you could call them barriers to situation awareness, just normal human things that get in the way of seeing what's happening around you, making good decisions about it. So that was the 2 and 7 tool, and that actually became the basis of adding the human factors pages to the incident response pocket guide. So if you look in your IRPG, I think it's Roman numeral 9 these days.
Right.
Those human factors pages came from the 2 and 7
from inside there.
From the and a lot of other folks that were involved, but yeah, very, very proud of that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and it was just like I said, one of those things. My burnover at Sawtooth was in 2006, so I was fresh-minded in human factors, getting trapped in the garage with my crew,
right.
and so me and you, like you said, hit it off and really started staying in touch and talking about human factors a lot. And you were pretty fresh off Yarnell too after that, to where we really started moving things forward. And
it's been, if I could just add one more comment, it's been just for me kind of cool over the years. One of the themes of this whole series is that after something bad happens, we want to find a way to do something good. And it's such an honor to me to be able to sit in Red Helmet Training Center, to see what you've built and what you're building, and to see how this has grown over the years, and knowing that this is, in a way, this is, I don't want to speak for you, I don't want to make an assumption, but this is your response to the bad thing that happened to you. Let's build something so we can train
It's
people.
the reason why I have an electric bill more than my mortgage of this 5,500 square feet of training facility.
But you're making other firefighters stronger, safer, smarter, and you were inspired to do that because of what happened to you. So I really respect that. Happy to be here.
Well, but I didn't quit my job and move to Arizona like somebody I know to try to make something out of what they went through.
Well, some of us take big risks.
So Brad, and you probably have read this in the book, that there was a time where he was struggling with not knowing what came out of Yarnell and the investigation, as being the lead investigator, struggling with that, and I talk about this all the time. He literally quit his job, moved to Arizona so he could be closer to the site and the people, and not too many people are that dedicated to do that. But I called him up not too long ago at home, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he's like, "Nothing." And I said, "I don't want to hear that out of you. I don't want to hear that you're doing nothing. You are an author. You got like 9 more books to write. I better hear that you're doing something cool." And,
what did I tell you nothing really meant?
well, the best part about it is he goes, "If you would have called me an hour earlier, I was cleaning up coffee grounds all over my kitchen counter that I just spilled all over the place." And I said, "Again, I don't want to hear that. If you spilled
That's why I told
grounds,
you nothing.
Yeah.
That's why I said, hey, you don't want to hear this.
If you spilled coffee grounds, I want to see like a vision in those coffee grounds." Like, that's the way your brain works. So I was really disappointed to hear you say nothing. I'm not doing anything.
Well, okay. I saved all my epiphanies for the book. So.
Let's walk through that, right? You do the investigation, and then tell me about how you literally walked into your boss's office and said, "I'm out."
Sure. So the investigation, the Yarnell Hill fire investigation was in 2013. That is a saga in and of itself, but we wrapped that up in 2013, and then moved on to other things, other investigations, and my relationship with the human factors stuff was really, I wanted to be a firefighter, and there was this opportunity to work on this unique issue of human factors. As especially when you and I were getting kind of spooled up on these topics, there wasn't a ton out there. There still isn't a lot out on the human side of firefighting, the human factors, judgment and decision making side of firefighting. Anyway, so for me it was this remarkable way to serve my tribe, the fire tribe, if you will.
Right.
And it just got to be so big that I kind of went off on my own, kind of around the time that you and I became friends, and focused on the human factors thing. But I kind of always wanted to get back to being a firefighter. And so by the time we were done with Yarnell and a few other investigations, a few other things, it's like, man, I've sort of taken this great big detour, and it's time to go back to what I came here for, which is to fight fire. And so that was great. I mean, I loved being on the crew. We had an event that I kind of share about in the book where, and it was really kind of the culmination of a number of things that I had seen on the line that year, where I just realized, it was one more straw on the camel's back of recognizing that I just don't see how we as a profession have moved forward and made ourselves stronger and smarter as a profession from this tragedy. And we always have done that historically. At least, when we have our historical pattern is we have a major event, in 1937 Blackwater fire, over 70 young men were killed or maimed out in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming, near the town of Cody. And from that, the whole concept of professional fire crews and smoke jumpers, those innovations were driven from the Blackwater. You can just keep going through history all the way up to 1994, the South Canyon fire, where 14 firefighters died. And it led to a number of what I call a human factors revolution, the leadership development revolution, a revolution in how we think about accident investigation. I call it accident investigation reform. So you have these major shifts that have always happened historically on the heels of our tragedy. And here I am looking at the Yarnell Hill fire. At that time it was 3-4 years later, and I'm going, I don't know what we've done as a profession to get better. I've met plenty of people who can tell me, at an individual level, what the event meant to them, or maybe something that they talked to their crew about, and that counts. That's important. Right. But as a profession, have we moved forward? Have we made this whatever the next step is going to be? And I took it especially. You can only kind of shake your fist at circumstances so long. You can only say for so long, this agency ought to do something, that agency, somebody ought to do something about this. And I looked around and it was like, look, man, I served as lead investigator. everybody has a different perspective on this accident, but there's nobody that knows at least pieces of this as I do. And if I don't do something, I don't see how it's going to get done. And so it was just a decision that, and actually the progress is a little more gradual. It was initially, I talked to my boss about taking a leave of absence. And I said, boss, this is going to be, well, first I tried working on it in the evenings, and then that didn't work, and I was trying to do stuff that says I need my own space where I could put stuff on the walls, and so I rented an office downtown Rancho Santa Margarita. And there was just this thing I was trying to work on was just expanding, and so I talked to my boss, and we were talking about different options, and this took quite a while to where I just said, boss, I think I need to, Cap, I got to get focused on this and only this, and how can I do that? And so we agreed, hey, let's work out a leave of absence. He was very supportive for me to take a little time off. Applied for a year, plan to be back in 6 months. Just if I just get focused, which is still an issue for me, is getting focused, staying focused. But anyway, so that year turned into my boss retired, and we got a new fire chief, and calling him hat in hand and saying, sir, I think I need one more year. and then that turned into, after 2 years, this, as you see from the scope that I described in there, it's just, there's so many, this event touches so many, I would say probably touches all of the major issues facing the modern fire service. And it is sort of emblematic of some of the struggles that we've had, where we have these problems or these issues that we feel that something should be done, but for some reason it seems to me that we're having, and maybe I'm speaking too broadly, and maybe I'm just saying how the world works from the canyon that I have to be standing in the bottom of looking around, but it just seems that there's a lot of things pressing in on us that we've struggled to find how we're going to innovate, what we're going to do in our generation, what's our contribution going to be. And so once you start to see that, it's like, well shoot, our history, I mentioned our history. Well, I didn't know that history all that well before this little period. So I ended up looking at our history and the history of our accident investigation. It's incredible. It changed my whole view of the profession and of our world. And there's a number of other things, looking at how, I'll stop listing topics, but there were all these sort of incredible side issues that needed to be addressed. In the end, it's all part of the totality of what needs to be addressed here. And so that's where we're at today, is, all right, well, let's take all of that and distill it down into a nice, orderly sequence of books that people can follow and be and use and make their own situation stronger. So
yeah, and I know that every time we've talked about it, we compare notes. You bring up wildland events that have actually had changes to training, changes to culture, changes to the way we do business. And I always talk about the structured fire side. You look at Brett Tarver and the changes that we've done in rapid intervention crew and command. You look at Nance, we have the Nance drill, or the Denver drill, all of those types of things. It's been, what can we do from this tragedy and actually make it better?
Right.
And we've bounced those things back and forth between me and you, and I think that we even were talking about it the other day, and you asked me, like, well, what's the biggest thing that you got out of Yarnell? And I said, I got my own problems with Sawtooth. I didn't worry about Yarnell. There's a ton of stuff that I think that we all can look at opportunities to say, I mean, even situational awareness. I think sometimes that's just a fallacy. It's like, hey, the fire's starting to do crazy stuff. Well, you're going to look at it harder? That's not going to change anything.
Right.
It's the situational awareness is great. It's actually how you actually go from the essay to doing something about it. And a lot of times it just goes by like, hey, that's a crazy fire. We'll get a picture of that. I always talk about if you have fire behavior that makes you want to take your camera out and get a picture,
yeah,
put your phone away, because it's going to get bad. And that was our thing on the Sawtooth. Before we got hit, we saw a pretty good fire whirl, and I wasn't thinking like, hey, this is extreme fire behavior. We need to change our tactics. We need to heads up. I was like, that's bitching. Get a picture of that.
Incredible. Yeah. Right. And we've all had that. Yeah.
And how many times have you've seen, like, we talk about trigger points all the time, and it's like, well, if the fire runs up this canyon, then we're going to do Well, what's the truth?
Right.
There's nothing that they're going to do.
Right.
We're going to change our tactics at that point. Well, to what? And at the same time, you said when this fire runs up this canyon, we know it's going to. So why are we calling that a trigger point? We know it's going to run up that canyon. You know?
Right.
So I know that a lot of us look at those types of things, and then unfortunately, human factors compound those decision-making trees even more.
Right.
So how did you get started in learning about human factors? You actually did some online stuff with Sweden, like a distance learning program.
Yeah.
Out there.
I did. So going back to, being a hotshot, getting interested in human factors, and starting working on the 2 and 7 tool and some stuff with LCES. I didn't study in college. I didn't study psychology or sociology. To me, that stuff all seemed kind of soft. I didn't like those topics. So I kind of started doing human factors sort of a little bit against my will. But anyway, so I realized it would be beneficial to go back and try to study human factors a little more formally. Applied to a program out in Sweden with Sidney Decker in human factors and system safety, and it was a distance learning program. So made a few trips to Sweden and a couple other places around, I want to say in the U.S. I'm trying to remember the details of how he did the program. The program was incredible. It had people from different high-risk industries all around the world. And so we were all sort of comparing notes about our accidents and our investigations and what we were all trying to do to be safer and more effective. And, getting in a room together, whether it was in Sacramento or Lund. And it was a great experience. And then I just kept building on that, got into accident investigations, and that's taken on a life of its own, and that brings us to where we are today. One thing that I just want to circle back to, you mentioned something about, we have the idea of situation awareness, and maybe there's trigger points, something needs to be done, and how sometimes it's hard to translate that into what we need to do. And that's one of the lessons that I found when I studied our history was, we live in a time where we tend to de-emphasize the individual contribution. We want to hear that the community did it, or the culture did it, or the group did it, or the team did it. But one of the big lessons of history that kind of, to be honest with you, that surprised me was how important that individual human contribution, that individual human that looks at a problem and says, I'm going to find a way to do something here. And throughout history, that individual taking the initiative, taking the risk to innovate, that has been the factor that drives our innovation and our progress. And there's all kinds of other things that have to happen with institutions and systems and agencies. That's all true, but it really requires an individual to go, okay, I'm going to do this. That's always harder than they think it's going to be. It's always riskier than they think it's going to be. But that's what drives forward progress. So
right.
I just thought I'd mention that. And I think that may be just, between you and me, I think that may be one of the obstacles kind of in our generation, in our era, is almost this idea that the individual shouldn't be taking too much initiative. You don't want to hang it out too far. You want to kind of, and it's like, well, maybe that's why we've struggled to innovate. Is maybe a lesson of history that's been inspiring to me is, maybe we need to think back to that concept of unless an individual does something, it's not gonna start. And why couldn't that be me? Why shouldn't that be me? And there's
right.
a million and one psychological reasons why. Oh no, I'm not the guy. And then you just gotta go, okay, I'm gonna do my part here. I'm gonna do what I can, come what may.
Well, and when we go back to the smaller scale situational awareness stuff too, and being the one that's doing something, and then getting people to listen, on Sawtooth, it was my probationary firefighter that when we were getting in a bad spot, she ran up to me and she says, Cap, I don't like the way it looks out there. And I dismissed it. I said, calm down, we're fine. I've been on fires before, and I had tunnel vision,
yeah.
and her eyes were wide open,
right,
because
yeah.
she has never seen any fire before.
Right.
And so it goes back to not only like, look, I'm the one person I'm going to try to make change, but we all know in the fire service, you know, that we don't like change. You know,
Right.
we're going to try to push that stuff back down too. And so you know, I guess it takes you quitting your job and moving, you know, to Arizona to kind of make that change. But I'm happy for you for it.
Hide in a cave and say, I'm just gonna do this thing, come what may, and also always takes a little longer than you think it's gonna take. So.
Well, and I knew talking to you back and forth, it's like, you know, well, one book has just turned into 4 books, and then 4 books has just turned into 9 books, and and that's the fun thing. Like, as an author, I know, like I'm still writing my book, but eventually I'm like, I can't keep putting more stuff in here. I gotta publish it. And you were like in that position where it's like, I'm just gonna send it out in segments, because if I wait till if it's all one book, it's going to take years to write.
Right.
And I know that, you know, talking to some of the people on the book club, they're like, you know, well, there's not a lot of meat in this one. I go, that's because it's supposed to be a huge book, and it's not, because we're trying to get little pieces of it out there. And I called you up. I go, you should make it like the Star Wars trilogy and come out like out of order, you know. But I see the way it's going. So like, what's in store for book 2 is coming out, or did you take my advice and go to book 7?
Well, I think that one of the decisions that I've made is that I will just periodically take a step back, set aside my plan, and be willing to take a different approach if that's what's going to serve the people I'm trying to serve. So I can tell you that the plan now is still consistent with the outline that's in that book, which is basically the purpose of that book. The purpose of Origins was to give the reader an orientation to the kind of the landscape of what it is we're talking about. What is the Yarnell Hill fire? You know, hot shots, all that. Just a general orientation, as well as a mental, kind of an emotional sort of sense of the direction that we're going to take together. So that was the intent of the book, of the first book. The second book is called Inner Anchors. And so the original intent was, hey, so here's what's necessary is, if we're going to learn from accidents, we have to have the right anchor points, right? Part of the problem when we try to learn from accidents, we try to talk from accidents, is people just show up and they just start saying the stuff that comes to their mind, you know? Right. And people say a lot of crazy stuff about accidents that are very unhelpful and not very constructive. And you know, this frustrated me for quite some time, and then I began to reflect on, well, what are the experiences that I've had that help me try to think clearly and stay anchored when you're facing, you know, what's more emotional than death? Death of guys that look just like you and the people you worked with. That's very emotional. Land, death, young people. I mean, this is emotional stuff, and it creates all kinds of chaos. And so how do you stay anchored to think clearly and to learn from tragedy? How do you do that? So we need inner anchors, right? You wouldn't fight fire, just show up and just start doing stuff. You need anchor points to work from. And so we need inner anchors. And so my intent with book 2, which was written, you know, was already written, was, hey, I'm going to give maybe a dozen anchors. It'll be, you know, in the format of something like a John Maxwell book. You know, here's the principle, here's the explanation, that kind of boom, boom, boom approach. And I have an editor who I'm so fortunate to be working with. He said, Brad, listen, if you really want to offer something to the people that you're trying to serve, tell them your story. Tell them the story of how you discovered these things, and make it personal, and, you know, let people see you hitting a brick wall and making a fool of yourself, and they're going to learn better if you do that. And I said, well, you know, no, I don't like that. And, you know, how I like to write, just real boom, boom, boom to the point. You know, you read most of my stuff. It's very, like, I want to be direct. I want to get in, get out, get to point A, point B, da-da-da-da. And with this book, I took his advice and I said, well, let's write it as kind of as a story, as a journey, or as the first leg of a journey. And the response that I got to Origins convinced me that, damn it, the editor was right. People want to go on a journey. They want to hear a story. They want you they want to go there together. And so that prompted me to rethink book 2. And instead of just listing principles and say, here's a principle, there's a principle of inner whatever, is to say, look, here's the story of my first major accident investigation, my first fatality investigation, and what we did and what we went through. Number one, I think it's going to be a compelling story to take people behind the scenes of I think it'll be something unique to take people behind the scenes of an accident investigation, but also to show all these ways that I learned these lessons. I think that'll be more compelling. It's harder to write though, right? I mean, it's tough to write essentially sort of a novel or a memoir, and it's so personal, and you're talking about these vivid topics. So that's kind of forced me to rethink book 2, but I think it's going to serve a lot more people and be a lot more powerful than just, here's a dozen principles, which is also powerful, but right. Here's a dozen principles, and here's how I had to come about them through trial and error and a whole lot of error, and you get to kind of laugh at me a little bit along the way.
I laugh at you all the time.
That's good. That's what,
but that's the thing too, is like, if when you're like, oh, I'm gonna write a book on the Yarnell Hill fire investigation, well, right. You've already put that out. You've put out the investigation.
Right.
You were on the team to do that.
Right.
But there's a ton of stuff that goes into accident investigations that people don't understand, and like you said, the emotional ties. I mean, just thinking about you, like literally, where were you at when you got the phone call that said, I want you to be like the investigator on this team?
Where I was at, I was working on a different fatality investigation. I had been asked to serve on the investigation of a young man that died from a tree strike in Northern California. The person who was organizing the investigation was trying to initiate some different approaches to learning from accidents, and we had been colleagues. I was reviewing his some of the stuff that he had written at the time when this accident happened. He said, "You want to just come up and be the lead investigator, and we're going to use our new setup. This is a Forest Service accident." He said, "We're going to use this new set of protocols, even though they're not official yet." I'm oversimplifying, but that's basically the gist of it. And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be the lead investigator of this new, what came to be known now as the coordinated response protocol." Anyway, so we had done that and had been on that for several weeks and got the bulk of the investigation and the writing done. And we were downstairs in his living room. I had gone home, taken some time off, gone back to his home in Idaho, and we were trying to work on this report. And, I remember, seeing flames, ripping across the TV, and they were talking about this thing that happened in Arizona and an entire hotshot crew, and it's like, oh, there's no way. They must have gone off the other side of the mountain, and
right.
People lost radio contact. There's just no way. It just doesn't work like that. An entire crew of 20 people or 19 people, I don't remember what they were guessing early on, and it became clear that it was real. And I just somehow knew, even though I was committed to the investigation that I was on, I knew I'm gonna get pulled into that other thing. And sure enough, a call came in, and I was asked if I would be willing to head down to Arizona. And so my initial response was, well, I'm kind of in the middle of something. But it turned out that the investigation that I was on, the other folks that were working on it were happy to just kind of run with it from there. I had built the foundation that they wanted and that they could build on, and so they were kind enough to release me, and so that's how that happened. But it was that experience of hearing about this event and going, there's no way that's true.
Yeah. And
then realizing it is true, and then going, okay, what are we going to do about it? And the decision for me, having been on a hotshot crew earlier in my life, the decision was, man, this is that event of our generation where we have to do our best for the fire service to gain something from this. This is it. And I felt that we did that over the course of the investigation. I feel that there was a certain level of follow through that didn't quite happen for a number of reasons, and we can there's no point right now to try to point fingers and blame. It's just the follow through didn't happen. And so it goes back to that idea of, okay, well, who's going to make it happen? How can we make it happen?
Right.
And recognizing, I got to do this, and we'll see what happens, come what may.
Well, amazingly enough, you talk about things coming out of accident investigations, and if you're referring to the tree strike in Northern California, the same one I think that is a case study in every fireline EMT medic class now. And when we teach it here, that is part of that class.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a ton of stuff where you can literally look at the way and how often we're bringing out fireline medics now onto every fire, it seems like,
right,
compared to then when that accident happened. That's the change that's going on, and so hopefully that investigation that you did is making a difference. I know that.
Yeah.
Now it's funny, when we look at the book, there's a thing in there that you talk about how originally you wanted to be Indiana Jones.
Right? Yeah, I did.
So when you were actually studying to do that, archaeology stuff, like finding the hidden treasure, how do you think that helps you in not only the investigation, but actually the way that you're writing the books and all that?
Ooh.
I knew I was going to give you a hard question eventually.
That's 3 hard questions. Okay.
Because I can see it in you. Every time we talk, there's that inquisitive, that's how your brain works. And I know that your previous life or direction you were going has definitely influenced you on where you are today. Finding that arc, finding
Sure. Okay, so 2 things come to mind. One is, I studied classical Greek, and was just really interested in translating the Odyssey and the Iliad, and there are these incredible pieces of literature that are, these artifacts of a bygone era, and that just fascinated me. These were stories that were told verbally for probably for centuries before somebody wrote them down, and so they just evolved in this spoken tradition. That was amazing to me, and I loved trying to create a translation of some narrative or some story that somebody was telling. And I think that what I got from that, one of the things about studying, especially ancient Greek, is you have to be able to master the details of how these words, what order they're in. There's these things they have in classical Greek called particles, which are these almost insignificant, easy to miss, just little single syllable, a lot of times just like just a little sound that's in the middle of the, but you have to master all of that and how all of these pieces fit together so you have to master the details, but at the same time, you have to understand the broader context of the author, what they're saying, and the rest of their work, and what was going on in society at the time, what was going on in the rest of the world. Right. So you have to have both the real precise, just uncompromising mastery of the almost mathematical details of how the text is written, as well as a broad understanding of what's going on at the time. And then if you're trying to build a translation, you have to take all of that, make decisions about what words you're going to put, what English words you're going to use, and you want to communicate it to somebody else, right? It's not cool to just translate it. I want to translate it so that somebody else can appreciate what the hell Odysseus is talking about when he says, I want to go home. You want to translate it so it's compelling, so it connects to people. So I think that experience, that intersection of the details matter, the big picture matters, and so you got to be real nitpicky about the details, but you got to be real loose and open to the big picture, and then you also need to connect that with whoever it is you're trying to serve. So that's, I would say, one piece of it. Another thing that I think shaped me was spending time around archaeologists who, one of the people that I tried to learn as much as I could from was a Near Eastern archaeologist. And man, you listen to these guys tell stories of going on a dig, and they're digging and digging for years. They're digging and digging and digging, and one shovelful, and then they sift it, and then they tag it, and they categorize it, and they label it, right? And years it takes before the picture emerges of this civilization in this place, in this way, at this time, that they're trying to paint that picture. And I think for me, that probably, I didn't think of this before you asked me, but now that you mention it, I think that probably was something that I really took to heart. Is, sometimes there's things that matter and you can go in and get them done, and that's how we're used to operating, right? That's the normal, there's a fire, you do something because it's moving, it's burning, right? And then there's other things where you just have to get in there and roll up your sleeves and dig, and what are we going to dig on today, and just keep going. And so that's
the hard part when you start talking about an investigation like Yarnell. I mean, there's political pressure and time pressure, and and do you think that that you could have spent longer on it with the team to to get to what you're doing now? And it was just because literally, like, we have to get something out.
So that's a really, really good question. And I'll put it this way. I think every investigation that has ever been done, ever in the history of the universe, you could have done it faster, and you should have done it faster. And also, you should have taken more time and been more thorough. You can always say there's all these ways that you could have gone deeper, and there's all these things that you could have skipped that and got an answer to people more quickly. So that's what I have come to accept, is that's just the reality of navigating an investigation. Is there will always be these trade-offs of how much time are we going to take, how much time are we going to use. With that said, I think it would be valuable to re-examine some of the ways that we approach our especially our major fatality investigations. I do believe, there have been some investigations that I was on where I was, just champing at the bit, saying we got to get this done faster. Some where I'm going, we need to, slow it down.
How long from start to finish did it take for the investigation for the Granite Mountain guys?
For Granite Mountain, I want to say I think it was just under 2.5 months, right. I believe. So the fatality was on June 30th, and I want to say we released the report, I want to say August.
Yeah.
No, September 12th.
Guideline, yeah.
Yeah. So that was 2.5. Now that was fast, I think. But it's a complex question. I don't necessarily have a concise answer, but I would say you may or may not want to say the investigation needed more time or should have more time. You could say that. But another thing that you could say is, well, maybe the way that we do investigations, we get the foundational material done and released quickly, and then we do follow-up investigations that dig deeper. Right. And you may have one team that does kind of the report that we did, or something like that, the sort of big picture. This is the overview sequence of events. And then you might even have other teams assigned to take on specific topics and issues that they're going to work on. I think that's an opportunity going forward in the future. This is getting a little bit into the weeds, but I think if you look at a lot of our major investigations that have happened in the last 20 years or so, there's a trend that you start to see of, you have a big accident with a big agency team that does the investigation, and then smaller agencies come in and kind of do their own little investigation. Right. And that often is not very well received, but it should be, because look, for example, at the Cedar Fire investigation. I'm sure probably most of the people that make unhappy men. I'm okay with that at this point. It's been many years, but our crew is actually on the Cedar Fire, although we were not there next to the tragedy. But the Cedar Fire investigation, you had the investigation done by CAL FIRE. They managed this main investigation, but then the local fire department, who actually lost their firefighter, that department conducted their own learning process that unfolded over years. Anyway, they did their own process. And I think that may actually be the model for the future, is you do one investigation and get it done in a very timely way, but then you create opportunities for these other reviews to happen, where people who are close to it, who have maybe a different set of biases, maybe a different level of detail that they're willing to go into. I think we would serve the people we're trying to serve a lot better if we had this concept of a series of investigations, as opposed to this is the official word and we're done. Right? And in my capacity as lead investigator, for us, it's sort of just the way to do business and be a professional is when you're done, you walk away from it. You don't keep, and so that was a hurdle that I had to get over years after this tragedy, after the Yarnell Hill fire investigation was, I said I was done, but this is a tragedy of our time and something needs to happen.
Yeah.
And what I can say and do now, I have a different role and a different capacity, and I can say things that I would not have been comfortable exploring in the official role as agency lead investigator. And so there's pluses and minuses however we do it. I think there's been huge progress made in how investigations are done from the early 2000s to today. So that progress needs to be appreciated, recognized. But I think it's probably about time to take stock and take the next step. And I think the model of we're going to show up, write the report, and then everybody walk away and nobody talk about it, I don't think that's going to serve us for the future.
Well, and like you said, investigations before used to just be placing blame on somebody, and now we're looking deeper into organizational culture, SOPs, normalization of deviance, or what I call the deviants, right? The people that deviate away from the policy or the expectation. And it's funny when you bring that up, like an initial investigation and then the deeper dive, if you will. We had a 72-hour report come out for Sawtooth. And it hit the solid marks about certain things, but at the same time, there's a ton of stuff that I talk about in my presentation when I teach it that isn't in the 72-hour report.
Right.
And it's a lot of human factors, mistakes that I made and things that I did. But amazingly, it's not that I was trying to hide it from the review panel. I didn't understand it all at the time. Right? Those human factors, like, it takes a while. Like, how did we get in that spot? And then you rewind the tape and you go through it again and you kind of figure it all out. And so it's the 72-hour report. Like, I look at it today and it's like, that is not even close to what happened.
Right.
But that was the initial investigation from them interviewing us and what we could come up with at the time. And it was still, our brains, it was 2 days later. And you're asking me all these questions about how it happened and why it happened, and and it's almost in those 72-hour reports too. It's like a Chiefs interview. You got all these Chiefs in there, and it's very intimidating.
Yes.
They got the court reporter kind of stuff going on, and so there's a lot of stuff in there that just wasn't in there for whatever reason. And I agree. I think that and when you look at the Cedar Fire, that internal, or the city doing their own investigations, not to debunk, necessarily what the investigation team is doing, but there's certain cultural factors and human factors. They know Steve and how he was, and I think there's a lot that they can bring to the table in there. So I get it.
And it's within their purview. It's within the purview of their local department to say, hey, we lost our guy. This is the things that we want to look at. And it's appropriate for them to dig deep in some of those things that you may not think, let's slow down the first investigation and bring a bunch of CAL FIRE guys, because that was the agency that handled the original Cedar Fire investigation. Would they be the best ones to tackle some of those agency-specific issues of culture and training and so forth? Or is that something the department themselves, a small department, is better off taking on by themselves? And I think that model of, hey, the first investigation is a first step, I think that's the model that could serve us. And for example, with the 72-hour report for Sawtooth, if you look at it in terms of, hey, it was a good first step. But honestly, would you expect that chief's interview format, would you have wanted them to dive deep into human factors and decision making and nitpick and theorize, or is that the kind of thing that maybe they need to produce a report that gives a good outline, gives a good foundation, and then allows that deeper exploration to take place over maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years. But that's the follow-up that I think that too, maybe that's a change that we need to make. One of the things with Yarnell that I found is there's almost this, everybody wanted to be maybe, or let's say, there was a desire to be very respectful, that I think almost we went to a point where we're being so much we don't want to talk about what happened or seem like we're disrespecting the fallen or not, that it's almost like, well, hold on, are we actually disrespecting the past by not learning from it? We're almost being so cautious because we don't know how to do that. So that culture of how do we respectfully continue to look, continue to think, but do it with the mindset of respect and respect for the past and love for the future, because you're doing it to make things better for other firefighters, which I think your model of what you did with Sawtooth is an example of that. It embodies that ethos of something bad happened, we're going to find a way to do something good, and I'm going to be open and continue building, and I commend you for that. I think it's an example for all of us. So
well, the problem is you lose your job and I got 5,500 square feet of rent. So financially, this thing isn't working out for either one of us.
I did not lose my job. I very respectfully resigned. And...
Yeah. So as you move forward, right? You got all these books in your head. Most of them are written with some cleanup and not writer's block, editorial block.
Yeah.
So what else do you have in store for, we talked about book 2, and you're going to bounce around, going back from where your first investigation and how that one ran, what you learned, coming into some different stuff. So
sure. So if you think of this series as like we're on an expedition together, right? This first book is sort of getting to know you, getting acquainted, right? And then we'll, in book 2, we're going to travel back in time and back to South Dakota for the Coal Canyon investigation, with the purpose being, okay, here's these kind of inner anchors that I learned, and I want to share them with you, and if you use them, they'll change your life. They'll change how you approach learning from tragedy. Some of the other legs of this journey will include an actual outline of these are the steps to do a learning investigation. So kind of having told the story of here's what I went through on this particular example, is to say, well, here's the recipe for a learning investigation. And the goal of that is, I recognize that most readers are not going to go individually do a fatality investigation, right? But understanding the principles, the practices, that here's how you sort of sequentially build, and these are the questions you want to ask, and I think that's going to really help people, because when you look at accident investigations, this is the most important force shaping the fire service, I believe, is accident investigations.
Yeah.
And yet we really don't know how they're done. We really don't understand why they're done, how they're done. Having done quite a few, I've seen the misinterpretations that happen, just right outside. I mean, this is something that is deeply, deeply misunderstood the whole accident investigation process. And so,
And in most fire departments, it's literally the training officer that just gets tapped.
right,
Like, hey, we just had a fire engine rollover. We
Right.
need you to put together an investigation. And like, what training have I had in that type of
Right.
thing? Yeah.
yeah, and so that's another sort of leg of our journey is going to kind of be, look, here's the recipe, man. Here's the recipe for an accident investigation, and you got to customize it to your situation. But these are the basic principles and practices. So we'll do that. We'll take a trip back to Yarnell and just take another look at the accident, and I'll kind of bring together these experiences that we've talked about. Having initially, when I was planning out this book, what I wanted to do was, let's get to Yarnell and we'll talk about the accident and the lessons that we could learn from it, and here's what needs to happen next. That was my initial,
Right.
that's what we're gonna do. And what I came to recognize is, well, you can't talk about the accident without talking about the investigation, but you can't talk about the investigation without giving folks a real foundation in what investigations are, what they can be, what they're not supposed to be. Our investigation in some ways, was the culmination of about 20 years of progress pushing back on some bad habits that had happened in the Wildland Fire Service. Not only that, but it was a callback to some of the very successful things that had been started and worked and served firefighters in investigations in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. We departed from those core principles maybe 70s, 80s, early 90s, and so those principles were sort of rediscovered in the movement that I was a part of. Well, if you don't have any of that background, if you don't have that, you're looking at maybe our investigation, Yarnell Hill Fire, and you're going, why the heck would you put it that way? Why would you do that? Why didn't you do this? And so I want to offer that to people, that here's the framework. This is why we approach it the way that we approach it. And I know that most of us, when you go through an academy and you go through training and you have the experience of being a rookie, you have an experience of training other people, that concept that if something bad happens, somebody probably should be blamed for it. And if you apply that blame effectively and consistently, you can manage behavior. Right? I mean, that is a core concept of how you manage a group of people. I think that assumption doesn't work as well as we think it does in the context of investigating tragedies, right? But you can hear me say that, it doesn't work to just assign blame and point to errors. That's not effective and objective and so forth. You can hear me say that, but I think it's going to mean a lot more if we take people through the process of, well, here's why we approach it that way. And so
when you bring it up, it's funny too. Like, everybody thinks like literally a wildland fire investigation where something goes wrong, you just take the 18 watch-out situations out and you just go, did they violate this? Did they violate that? It's a ton more than that. It's not just, well, let's look at the 10s and 18s and figure out what they did wrong.
Right.
Yeah. So from there, where are we going after that?
So we will go back to Yarnell and we'll take a fresh look at some of the events of the Yarnell Hill accident, a fresh look at the investigation itself, and then we're going to see why it is that a beginning of kind of how did we get stuck? Why have we been stuck here? We'll take a look back at our history from there, which I already mentioned, and by looking at our history, first of all, it's a cool history. My focus is going to be wildland firefighter history, but I also look at some of the stuff that Chief Brunacini did and the innovations that he inspired. And we're going to ask, what are the lessons of this history? It's not only okay, historically we have a tragedy, then we innovate, then we make things better. That's the key point. But then the question is, how do we make things better? How do we learn from the success of our past, right? And so we'll take those lessons, what it is that have made firefighters successful at learning and innovating and leading after tragedy, covering about 80 years of history. And then we'll bring all of that to today and say, okay, so what can we do with the Yarnell Hill Fire? How can we make this meaningful for the future? And along the way, I'll be taking some side trips where I just share my own, there's obviously some concrete lessons that I think can be applied that don't necessarily require this whole journey, But the point of the journey is I'm not only seeking to impart like this is the thing that I'm advocating that folks do. I'm not just trying to advocate specific like recommendations. I'm trying to show there's a different way of approaching tragedy, and we can do something with the Yarnell Hill fire. And if we do, we can actually get better as a profession. And it's going to matter for whatever the next one is, because there will be other accidents, right? And we can't squander these tragedies, right? I mean, you think about, nothing can bring back the people that are lost. Nothing can give people their, if you've been harmed, nothing can make things like undo the tragedy, but we can learn from it and try to do our best for the next person. And I think there's a risk of wasting that opportunity. And I think that's, we've been doing that a little bit, and we can change that. And so there's a bigger picture of a cultural shift that there's recommendations that I want to say, here's how we should think about LCES that I advocated. And here's this thing about communication, and, that we should try this thing or do that thing or what, but there's a bigger picture of, here's a different approach to how we can learn, and everybody can make it your own in your own way, and apply it in your station, because that level, the innovative company officer who's looking for ways to train the people under their leadership, that is the bedrock of innovation in the fire service. And that sounds like a wild statement to make, but if you look back at where our innovations actually came from, it came from individual leaders, a lot of them with very strong operational backgrounds, going, hey, let's try this, let's try that, let's try. And then they start talking to each other, and then they start trying things, and then sort of the institutions, the wise institutions, find a way to integrate those things that are working.
Right.
You can see that in the Forest Service, you can see it in local government fire, where when innovation is really, really successful, at least in the cases that I looked at, the dozens of cases that I looked at, what happened was these bigger institutions and agencies found something that was working and kind of made it official. I dare to say that if you compare the innovations that happened that way, where you had grassroots innovators who are empowered to innovate and try in their little corner of the world, and then talk to each other, compare the innovations that happened that way, and then agencies came in and said, okay, we're going to make this official. Compare those versus the ones where you put a bunch of people in a room, and you go, okay, think this out and create a paper and document it.
Right.
The top-down innovations. I would dare to say that these bottom-up grassroots innovations have been far more successful. The question is, what impedes that, right? What is it that impedes us? And again, tying back to Yarnell Hill fire, there is this culture of we don't want to talk about it, or we can't talk about it, we don't know how to talk about it, we don't know what to say about it, for a lot of different reasons. Well, that quashes the ability of that grassroots innovation to find something meaningful, communicate about it. And so,
well, it all comes down to empowerment is a big portion of that.
Right.
And the other one is getting to that effective learning domain.
Right.
That cognitive domain's easy. It's getting into how does this affect me?
Yeah.
And you whether it's something big like Yarnell, or you have an accident happen in a fire department somewhere, and you bring it to the kitchen table, and you're like, hey, we're going to look at this accident that occurred at this place. And the first thing at the kitchen table is, well, was it a volunteer fire department, or was it in this area, or they automatically want to squash it because it's like, well, they're not this, or they're somewhere else, or and you have to try to connect it to, this can happen to us too, and this is how, and a lot of it goes back to that, the empowerment. And when you start using these types of things, bring it to, how does this connect to us and our fire department and our people?
Right.
And I know that's what you're trying to do in the book, and it's forced me to rewrite my entire second book on Sawtooth from just a
how.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, it has now become the Sawtooth fire, a study in fire and human behavior. because the human behavior was driven by the fire behavior.
Yeah.
Everything that we did,
yeah,
right? Every mistake I made, flawed situational awareness, poor decision making was driven by stress of the fire behavior, right? Changes in the fire behavior, and all the way leading up to my personal interactions with my crew.
Yeah.
The blow up of the fire was a small thing. The blow up between me and one of my crew members falling out is a completely different thing.
Wow.
So diving into that stuff, that there's a ton. When you have a, we're talking about fatality accident investigations, but even a near miss like I had in the garage with my crew, there's animosity between myself and one of my firefighters that was, you tried to kill me. You put us in a bad spot. And originally for years I deflected it, and now I'm like, no, there's part of that I need to see, because it affects my leadership ability going forward. It affects my decision making going forward. Am I worried about, like, I'm taking a crew on a strike team and it's like, are they going to trust me to take them into battle?
Right.
So yeah, I called you a jerk on the phone the other day. But you have literally like flipped the script on my second book, and now I got to rewrite a bunch of. Yeah, thanks, Brad.
You called me a jerk because I
made my book better. Yes, yeah, that's it. So.
Just minding my own business inspired you.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, guys? What time is it? You got time? 10:30. I'm going to let you guys have some questions here. Obviously, we're going to wrap up with a honoring the guys from Granite Mountain on the 8-year anniversary. But I'm going to close out this meeting, and then we'll do some questions after we close up. Do you have an expected release date for the next one? I asked him this shit the other day. It's a problem with the way his brain works, and I think you could see it in the way this meeting is going.
No expected date yet. I'm trying.
That's not the answer that we all want.
Before the end of, expected release date, before the end of 2021.
If I was your editor, publisher, and all that kind of stuff, I know he's giving you great advice. Book 2 should have come out today on the 8-year anniversary. What is wrong with you?
You're absolutely right. I will do better.
I mean, my first book's like 5 months behind, so I can't give you shit.
I know. And how far behind is your second book?
Just started. Yeah, I get you. Whatever.
It's the nature of the beast.
Yeah. Anything else, guys? All right. Next month will be John Salka, so you get to hear an FDNY accent at least. It'll be well worth that, just for that.